Hello, friends. Wow, straight in at 56 viewers in a space of 10 seconds. That is a record. Obviously, Robbie Burns does something for everyone's appetite for whiskey. We're down to 44 already. lost 10 people in 2 seconds. Welcome to another Whisky Me live tasting. I'm going to give you a brief introduction and the kind of order of service before we crack into this, because this is an ambitious one. It may go wrong. We are indeed spanning 2 continents, surprisingly, a surprise to me. And we've got 2 guests. So normally when we do live tastings, we do 2 separate tastings, one for world whiskey, one for Scotch single malt whiskey. This month's a little bit different. We thought we'd have a little bit of fun with it. First of all, our world whiskey is from Scotland. Any world whiskey or adventure subscribers will know since they've received it already. And it's, of course, Arbikie Highland Rye. But it's not a normal Scotch whiskey. It's a rye whiskey, grain whiskey. And as we are going to find out when we come to taste it, especially if you have both pouches, it's rather different to a single malt. And the second reason for joining these 2 together is that tonight is, of course, Burns night, celebrating the poet Robert Burns. And we thought, you know what, 2 Scotch whiskies, a Scottish legend, let's combine it all into one. We'll taste some whiskey. And not only that, we'll read out some Robbie Burns poetry as well. And probably the whole thing's going to get a little bit messy. And there may be 3 or 4 of us left in an hour. Just listening to me and Craig ramble on and attempt to recite some poetry, or at least me. But it'll be fun while it lasts. So that's how it's going to work. Now, if you're Scotch whiskey only, the Glentauchers, we're not going to start that tasting for about 20 minutes. We're going to do Arbikie first, but you may like to stay and listen to our first guest, Christian Perez, who's, by the way, on holiday in Chile at the moment. Talk a little bit about Arbikie. Perhaps pour yourself another dram if you don't have any Arbikie in front of you, and just listen to him talk about this amazing new distillery in Scotland, and then we'll go on to the Glentauchers. Similarly, if you haven't got the Glentauchers, then you're obviously going to want to listen to us talk a little bit about Arbikie for the next 20 minutes, and you may decide after you've kind of wet your lips with a whiskey, you want to pour yourself another one, and then listen to me and Craig Harper basically talk shit for about half an hour. So let's crack into it. I promise you it's going to be fun. And I am going to introduce our first guest, which is Christian Perez from Arbikie Distillery. Hello, Christian.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I only found out 15 minutes ago that you are on holiday, and not on holiday like somewhere close by, but in Chile.
Yes. I'm visiting my my family, and I came over here to introduce my new little baby, my reborn Leandra, to my family. So everybody is stoked, and my niece decided to paint my nails.
Oh yes.
So yeah, and my toenails, but I won't show you those.
It's good to mention that now, so that we don't have to wonder what on earth's going on with your nails for the whole.
Yeah, it's a new style or something. Yeah.
Get all those embarrassing bits out in the open. So you're from Chile originally?
I'm originally from Chile, and I grew up in Venezuela, and then I started making wine in California, and then Canada, Chile, and then New Zealand. And I ended up in making whiskeys and gins and vodkas in Scotland. So yeah, it's been a nice trajectory.
How did the transition from wine to spirits happen?
Curiosity, and just looking for becoming more creative in making alcohol in products. Because before I used to be a bartender, and then I just decided to go through that route of going into the itty bitty of chemistry and biochemistry and all that, and there was no turn back. And I learn every day. I've not stopped learning about alcohol making and creating products.
What's your current role at the Arbikie Distillery? I want to talk a little bit about the distillery and its philosophy in a minute, but what's your job there?
I'm a production manager, so I look after all of the yields and how the raw materials are incoming into the distillery. And it's worth to mention that we are a farm distillery, so we have all of the raw materials planted surrounding the distillery. So we have a very good hold on the quality of the product. So we depend on the weather. And I also look after the cask maturation program. So I do the procurement and from France, Hungary, Spain, and the United States, and I make sure that we get some interesting casks, and then your generic bourbon casks.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about the origins of this distillery and the farm and everything.
Well, the farm used to be a shed where they had cows, and then my colleague Kirsty Black was in charge of developing the distillery, and then she phoned me and said, "Hey, you want to have a pint and get this distillery going?" So yeah, we did, and the owners.
Had you worked with her previously then somewhere else?
Yeah, we graduated from Harriet Watt at the same year. We went through the program of getting our masters and things like this. So yeah, it was a great program. Yeah. So the Sterling family is the owner of the property and the distillery. So yeah, they needed some intense and creative people to get this going, and here we are on the 6th year.
Yeah. So what's the story about the rye whiskey? Why the decision to go with rye? Obviously the obvious choice is to farm barley, presumably, and make a single malt. So why the sort of point of difference there?
Well, I mean, it's a bit of it's a crazy story because rye it's not very adaptable to the area because it's a tall grass, so it's very challenging to harvest in the first place with the combines. But sometimes you persevere, you make things happen. So it's not only that we had the land to plant a small portion of rye seeds to see how it develops, but it's also we have the equipment. You see, we have 2 pot stills with declining line arms, but we also have a column which is a hybrid, which 42 plates, which I can use only either 42 plates to make a 96% vodka or 22 plates to make a single grain whiskey, which takes me up to 89 to 90%, 91%, depending on how you manage your condenser or what type of raw material you're using. So we had that in place. So we said, yeah, let's do it. Let's give it a go, making rye, and then using the ASB or the American New Oak casks with a char level. So we started playing with different char levels to see what matches the best to the raw ingredient. And it's always a work in progress, even until this day. We're trying to see, it's still maybe the number 3 or number 2 works better. We started with number 4. We figure out that maybe char 4 is too heavy for Scotland because we don't have the temperatures that they have in Kentucky. We have colder temperatures. So it's like making a tea with cold water, you see. So you start extracting more of the tannins they become a bit too astringent. So you have to manage your maturation so that you are racking that liquid at a certain point, and to avoid over oaking the spirit, basically.
Yeah. So what is the goal with the flavor profile of the spirit? Are you trying to make a sort of Scottish interpretation of an American rye, or is it more like a rye interpretation of a Scottish malt, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a very good question. I think we are just trying to make a spirit that demonstrates what it is. I don't see it as, I'm going to copy the American industry. Yeah. I think what we want to do is to just demonstrate that the consumer can tell that this is rye and that it's made in Scotland. But most importantly, it's just the Arbikie character involved, because we have it all. The raw material, all the plants are surrounded the distillery. So I think that's our main ethos is just to show that we have the ability, I don't want to say the word terroir, but to show the character not only of the spirit and the distillery, but of what the raw material is. The word terroir can be misused sometimes, so that's why I don't want to use it too much.
Yeah. Before we went live, we were just really quickly talking about the sort of almost winemaker's approach to making whiskey and the treatment of the raw material. And the way you were describing it to me was as if, you're considering what the different cereals are behaving like, tasting like, what the yield is, what the other components of that cereal are each harvest year. And then once you understand that, you're then going, right, well, we'll ferment like this way, or we'll distill this way, or we'll mature in this way, so that everything, I guess, is sympathetic to the original character of that cereal. Was that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I mean, every year, even with single malts, you will have to adjust your roller mill per se, because those grains, they may come with a harder husk, or your ratio of your grease ratio is not going to be working for your lauter ton. So for us, is the development. Yeah, we have to do an analysis on the raw material to see what type of nitrogen or levels of nitrogen there are, what type of starches there are, proteins, and then you start assembling your recipe according to these levels, and then you start, doing your trials, and then doing your mashing and your fermentations, and see how it goes. But yeah, it's for the rye whiskey, because it's going into a cooker, is not as extreme as with the single malt, where it's going into a lauter. So we have to be careful when we're making single malt that our ratios are correct. Otherwise, you get too much flour, and then that lauter you get lower yields. Whereas with the grain, the single grain, which has wheat, barley, and rye, we choose the ratios according to the different crops that we have. If the wheat is tasting really nice and sweet, we'll probably add a little more. If it's a little bit less. If it's tasting a little bit more vegetable-y, then we have to add a little bit more to capture that sweetness out.
Interesting. So it's like blending cereals before you've even got to anything new whiskey making.
But then once we got it, then we leave it for the entire year. We don't want to be messing around every week. You put no, just But that's the idea of what we want to do in the future. Always be like optimizing the production.
How many acres have you got that you're growing cereals on?
All right, that's going to be a tricky question. We are set on 2,000 acres, but I think that we are growing cereals that the distillery uses is about 50 or 60, and I'll have to double check with John. You got me. Not that much. Yeah, if I have my calculator here.
Oh, don't worry, it doesn't matter. So the farm's producing a lot of cereals for other industries and the like as well.
Mostly for other industries, the malt. The barley we're producing for other companies. The rye, we try to put it on the market, but no one seems to be interested. But if there's anyone there, is distillers, and you're interested in doing rye, just email me or John.
Right. Cool. Let's have a taste.
Sure.
Actually, I've already tasted it, obviously.
And this bottle used to be for my cousin. I brought it for him, Enzo, but I'm going to open it. But I'll only take a little bit, man. So.
Is it your cousin's? Did you say it's your cousin's birthday?
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, that's my other cousin. Happy birthday, Camila. And
happy birthday, Camila.
Andrea, that's my sister. They're listening on their homes, but yeah.
Birthday on Burns night, brilliant. Always gonna be a quiet one.
You guys are in a very cold environment over there, and another reason why we like this Highland rye, and why we're gonna always try to make it the same. Look at my nails; they're nice. It's because it's very flexible, meaning on how you can drink it. You can drink it neat. It's 30 degrees here. I'm not gonna drink it neat. Or you can drink it with ice. That's how I'm going to drink it now. Or in cocktails. So we're hoping that people can enjoy it however they want. It goes really well with Manhattans or, what's the name of this other one? The one with the little cherry, I forget. Old fashioned, yeah. Or straight up, I'm going to taste it with ice, and it's just delicious. It opens up nicely. There's nothing wrong with even tasting a single malt with ice. I grew up in the Caribbean, and you do not drink any single malt whiskeys neat. You just have to put ice. You have to make sure that the ice is good. It comes from good water. So, yeah.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly a thing, a much more common across the Atlantic. I mean, obviously in North America, it's very common to drink whiskey on ice as well.
Absolutely.
And I think, this is a rye whiskey that is made with charred casks and made from rye. And so it probably shares more in common with American spirits than it does Scottish, even though obviously all the materials and the manufacture are in Scotland. So probably it's fairly appropriate to be made on ice like that, to be served on ice like that.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we're using, sorry for interrupting you, using the charred casks, and then it's because the science is there, right? I mean, we are distilling on the skin. Yeah, so because we are distilling on the skin, it's going to be collecting a lot more of heavy oils or fusel oils, and they're difficult to distill on the secondary distillation. They're difficult to separate. They're really heavy, but we want to make a rye that is heavy, but we also want to make it so it's elegant. So we use a portion of the column still, so that we combine both and make something that is palatable, but is robust, muscular, but elegant. And most importantly, that it has a long elastic finish. Yeah.
Elastic finish. I like that. Just keeps on bouncing.
That's right. It's a winemaking terminology there.
I love that. I'm going to use that more often. You know what? It's really good. I'm going to get some tasting notes up from the audience. I'm going to also bring Craig in a minute, so prepare yourself, Craig. But what I will say is I tried the 2021. This is the 2022. You got 21 there, I think, haven't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. We have all got 22. And I think they're different, and a difference is cool, but I think I prefer the 22, actually.
Okay, sure. What do you prefer about it? Tell me.
Yeah. I'm sure people can source bottles of the 21 if they want to do a comparison. Right. Let's get up some questions and things like that, and some tasting notes. If you've got any questions for Christian, because Christian's going to run in about 5 minutes. So this is your own chance. You're not going to get a lot of sense out of me and Craig. So this is really your opportunity to get.
I get a lot of black tea and sweet tobacco.
Black tea is a great one. It is. Yeah. It's like slightly sweetened black tea. Yeah.
But like sweet tobacco almost too, and that comes from, you're distilling on the skins. You're putting a lot of stress on that pot still. A lot of that tobacco comes in, which is also part of the fermentation. Our fermentations are 120 hours on the skin, so there is a little bit of lactic or malolactic fermentation happening there. The lactic acid bacteria gets in there within the third day, and it starts doing its thing for the remnant of the days. So it lowers your pH. By lowering your pH, you allow the extraction of more aromas during the distillation. So it's like I said, we're only looking to optimize the products year after year. We're very new, so every year we're learning what to do. Excuse me, for the next year and so forth. But it's tasting nice. I quite like it. Yeah.
Someone just got rid of it. Someone commented saying it's not as aggressive as the American ryes, and I think what they're getting at there is a lot of American ryes have quite spicy. They're quite hot. And they've got that sort of almost gluey. It sometimes sort of stretches into like stone fruit. Yeah. And then you also sometimes get like a green jalapeno note on it. Whereas this feels a bit more finessed, I guess.
Okay.
There's that tea note is really something I can't get out of my head now. Now that you've said it, I think that's really powerful. And there's some. I mean, there's that sort of nuttiness to it as well, which you'd expect from rye. Sure. And nutmeg as well, I get on the finish.
Yeah, Carlos is right. That's one of the descriptors that we have written down in the books. Is nutmeg, and you get cloves. Well, I think it was at 2020 that you get more heavily clove than this one. This one was a bit more settled on that. So yeah. Hi, Craig.
Hello, Craig.
Hello. How are you?
How you doing? Welcome.
Really good. It's the best rye I've ever had, Christian.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah,
I usually do. I like rye in cocktails. I never drink on its own. I always find it a bit aggressive, and that little that hotness that comes through. This is wonderful. Like it's obviously rye when you get it, but then that black tea was good. I get a bit of cake off it. I love cake. That's a compliment. But that sort of sweetness, that sort of cake, and it comes through. Yeah, I think it's amazing. It's lovely. I put a bit of ice in as well.
Well, one of the notes we put on the front was just a cupcake.
Cupcake, yeah. Awesome.
We got cupcake, wood, and nutmeg on there.
Yeah. I also
wish I put tea now because it really does taste like tea to me.
Yeah. Great.
I also had that as cake, but we didn't want to put it in the label, I guess, because it might have been a bit too confusing for the consumer. I always think that you should just go with your instinct right there. I definitely like and I think that cake note that you get, it might be from the wheat and combination. Yeah, I think so, because it's so prominent. When we make the wheat vodka in the distillery, my goodness, it's so delicious. And we make out of the strawberry vodka. So we macerate the strawberries with the wheat vodka, and then we distill it, and then you get cheesecake, strawberry cheesecake vodka. And that was a trial.
Now, Christian, that sounds amazing. You mentioned the wood, so you're charring the barrels. This is a heavy char, is it? Or
no? This is a char 3 with a medium toast and light toasts. And we, as I said before, we have to always monitor our rye during this time, because we are in a cold environment most of the year, and also in with high humidity. So it's a long maturation, but the extraction of the tannins, it's accelerated almost on this type of casks. So you're not really extracting the wood sugars first, like in Kentucky, that you go with, that alcohol penetrates the staves at the pores, and it goes into the sugar, this sugar cellulose, and starts extracting, and then you get a lot of heavy mouthfeel. There's amazing American rye whiskeys, and also in Germany they're making amazing rye whiskeys as well, in Denmark.
This isn't heavy at all, though. I think this is really well balanced, which is lovely.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the management of the casks that we're starting to do, just so that when you're making a cocktail, or if you're drinking it as with ice, or even neat, it doesn't overpower you. It doesn't say to you, "Oh, I can only have one." Like if you're having a heavy cavernous, on the first glass you're gonna be parched. We want to do kind of like the same. We want the consumer to go and taste again and again, like a good single malt that you go back, and you go back, you finish the glass, maybe another one, why not?
And that epic fermentation, how did you end up with 120 hours? You just kept letting it go to see where it was going to get to, or
that's another question. Yeah, I'm being an advocate for long fermentations for a long time, since I was in the winemaking industry, unless you get bad grapes. You get bad grapes, 48 hours, that thing is to be fermenting fun, And we started out long fermentation with the potatoes. The potatoes, that was the first crop that we made alcohol from. And it wasn't finished until the 7th day. And then we went 7 days, it is, for anything with skins. But we went to taste the wort, I will say, that is fermented. And you can tell that on the 5th day it was finished, but a little bit more malolactic. It doesn't hurt anyone. We don't have a high disease pressure. We just went ahead and allowed it to finish on the 7th day, and it works perfect for the schedule. 7 days, you don't have to mess up with having oh goodness. So
that's amazing. That's delicious.
Cool. Awesome. Good stuff. Right, there's been a ton of complimentary comments coming through. I can't even put them all up. Some of them are so long that they won't even fit on the screen. They'll cover our faces. But I did want to put this one up just because there's someone called Panicking Skywalker, and that made me laugh.
Nice. Best. Nice.
So we will leave it on that. Nice. The nose is amazing, so rich and fruity, but it doesn't give away
licorice,
the flavor.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. A hint of licorice, beautiful.
Panicking Skywalker. Oh goodness.
It's great, isn't it? Yeah. Cool. Well, look, Christian, we're gonna let you go because you got to get to your cousin's party.
That's right.
We've got poetry.
Camila, I'm coming.
Thanks so much for joining us, and we are going to continue on with the
anyone
next
that wants to come to Holiday to Chile, you should come to Holiday to Chile. It's an awesome country. Tomorrow I'm going to be going to the observatories in the desert to be surrounded by millions of stars, and I can't wait because astronomy is awesome.
Well, it's going to be cloudy here and maybe wet.
Yeah. Right on. Awesome.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye. Oh,
care,
I cut him off just as he was saying
cut
goodbye.
But,
we don't drag these things out too long. Great. Well, that was successful. And here we are transitioning into our next tasting. So, Craig, welcome. Craig, for anyone who's not familiar with him, which some of you might be because he's been on one of these live tastings before, is all-round whiskey expert, my best mate, and also Scottish. Which is useful since it's Burns night and we need someone, at least one person on the chat to be able to recite some Burns poetry with a legitimate Scottish accent, I think.
That's why I've been drafted in, really, isn't it? That's the main reason, to be honest. Christian couldn't do it. You could, is that okay? That's fine. Christian and Tristan didn't have the rolling of the R's to get it done.
Well, I've been practicing in the front of the mirror, so we'll see how it goes.
That's a great rock, isn't it?
It's really good. Do you know what though? I now that he's gone, I can say this. I tried the 2021 and I was like, it's nice. Yeah. But I reckon this is a real jump up. This is the latest one, yeah. And the good news is the price has gone down. So the 2021 was £129 a bottle. Yeah. For a 70cl, which is punchy. And this one, I think they're down to about £89. We're selling it through the Whisky Me website.
I was about to say, if it's there, I will grab myself a bottle.
It's there, yeah. And you can use a discount code and everything.
But I seldom think American rye on its own, but that's delicious on its own, yeah.
Yeah, well, do you know what? I really like American rye whiskey, but that is a different take on it for sure. And that's what you want, right? I mean, you want Scotland. You want the sort of the fact that it's made in Scotland. Put some sort of imprint on the character of the whiskey.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're going to taste Glentauchers now. Normally what we do is we bring in an expert from the distillery itself, but you know, as we've mentioned a lot in communication around this month's whiskey, Glentauchers is not a distillery that's particularly well known. It's unusual to find bottles of it. There's no official bottling of it as such, although we'll get into that. And so, you know, short of phoning up the distillery and saying, is Clive the Stillman available for a Whisky Me tasting tonight? It's not going to happen. So again, another reason to bring Craig in so that we can taste it and talk about it together. But obviously what's most special about this is that we bought the barrels. So it's a Whisky Me exclusive. We were offered the sale of 3 casks of whiskey from this distillery about 6 months ago or 9 months ago. And we sort of did the sums in our head. And we were like, okay, this is perfect. If we combine all 3 casks together, we'll have enough whiskey to send out to all of our single malt subscribers and then have probably about 150, 200 bottles worth left over, which we thought was about the right amount, you know, to have saved so that if you like it, you can buy it. And it turns out a lot of you do like it because I think we've sold at least half of them, possibly 2/3 of them already. They're for sale on the Whisky Me website and only the Whisky Me website, of course, because it's our whiskey. I think they're £69 each, but obviously you can get 10% off that with your discount code Whisky Me Club 10. Just a little bit more about the whiskey itself. It's a marriage of 3 sherry casks, and they're first fill sherry casks. So that means they've come from Spain, having previously held sherry. They've arrived in Scotland, and whiskey has been put in them. And then the whiskey that's put in them has been taken out at 6 years old, although it was about a week under 7 years old. The reason that we need to sort of make a distinction there is that you can reuse those casks again and again and again and again. And of course, the more they get used, the more sort of knackered and spent they get. And most notably of all, the less sherry tasting the whiskey becomes, because a lot of the character of the sherry that you get in a whiskey like this is literally from sherry that's in the barrel itself. it's kind of one of the loopholes of Scotch whiskey that you sort of, when you use first fill cask, you're kind of dosing in a bit of bourbon or sherry into that whiskey.
One of my favourite loopholes, though, because I love sherry. So, yeah.
It is. It's fortuitous. So, yeah, it spent all its time in sherry casks, and that also is not that common to find single malts released that way. A lot of the whiskies that we see with sherry cask on the bottle have actually only spent 6 months or a year in that type of cask, and the majority of their life would have been in bourbon barrels, usually, and ex-bourbon barrels. So that's the sort of biography of this whiskey. We're super happy to be sending it out. This is only the third time we've done this, and this is obviously by far and away the biggest sort of cask marriage we've done, because there's just so many more of you now. So it's super exciting. I think it's probably the best one so far, but it's one for the sherry lovers for sure.
Which is probably another reason why I was brought in, so I do adore it.
We're going to do some poetry as well. So we're going to do some Robbie Burns poetry. I think we should probably disperse it evenly throughout the next sort of 20 minutes or half an hour, so that we don't sort of get annoying for more than about 2 minutes at a time. And since you're Scottish, I'm wondering if you want to kick it off with something.
Right, I will. So I will do a Scotch drink, because that seems very apt. And it was also from his first. You might want to pour yourself a little bit of dram just to make it better. I tend to find that the more you drink, the more you understand.
I'm going to listen to Scotch drink. Yeah.
Oh, hello. That's lovely. Right. So Robbie Burns, Scotland's national poet. Probably after Happy Birthday, Auld Lang Syne is the most sung song in English. He also wrote that. We tend to think of him that sort of biscuit tin image, but you're all in a whiskey club. You understand, whiskey also suffered from that. Robbie was a revolutionary. He is Russia's poet laureate as well, so they teach him in schools in Russia. He was really popular before the revolution and after as well, and kids still come across. He fathered 12 children, was rather keen on the ladies. I think he holds the world record for paternity cases against them, which is 32. And he did all this. He died when he was 37. He liked to drink. Okay, so this was from his first collection of poems when he was 27 years old. He literally was born on a farm. They call him the ploughman poet, but he was a labourer on the farm. So this is his first collection of poems when he's 27. And this is what made him famous, essentially. He was actually going to emigrate to Jamaica, and that was already put in place. But when he released these poems, the book sold out in 2 weeks. They did a second printing, and he all of a sudden became famous and was taken up to Edinburgh and lauded amongst high society. And that's, I guess, kind of his appeal, because he was a common man, but obviously he was a genius, but he appealed to everybody all over. So this is Scotch drink. Let other poets raise a fracas about vines and wines and drunken Bacchus, and crabbed names and stories rack us, and great our lug. I sing the juice Scotch beer can mack us, in glass or jug. O thou, my muse, good old Scotch drink, whether they're wimpling worms thou jink, or richly brown remow with the brim, in glorious fame, inspire me till I lisp and wink and sing thy name. Now, there are 130 lines of that, which I'm not going to go over, but I am going to go over my favourite stanza in there. So I learned to drink in a place called the Black Isle, in a place called Cabokie Pub, and the next village along from Cabokie is Ferrentosh, which, if you're a whiskey geek, is famous. So this poem was written in 1785, and in that year is when basically Ferrentosh was allowed to produce whiskey for no duty, because they got burnt down by the Jacobites, and they kept that for a long time. That allowed them to sell whiskey really cheap, good whiskey, really cheap. And Burns,
it became the biggest distillery of the era. Hey, it was huge for its time.
It was massive in a tiny place. There's no trace of the distillery now. I've actually walked over the grounds. There's footings, but there's hardly anything there. But this was the year they actually took away that, and it made all whiskey prices shoot up and the quality go down, which may be one of the reasons why I wrote it. But it's my favourite stanza from it. Thee Ferrentosh, you're sadly lost. Scotland's lament frae coast to coast. Now Collett's grip and barking host may kill us all. For loyal Forbes' charters boast is taken awa. So basically Forbes lost the right to make cheap whiskey at high quality prices, which Burns was lamenting. But yeah, that's an amazing poem. And it's, as I say, Robbie didn't write many short ones. And you do need to hear that you want to buy, if you're ever going to buy a book, make sure you get the one that has the explanation of quite a lot of the words, because you're not going to know otherwise. It's like Shakespeare. If someone says it, you understand it. But if you just read it, you're like, nah, not really sure what's going on there. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to do John Balicorn, the Ballad of, which I'll do in a little while. But actually, that's a relatively easy to understand one. I think there's not too much complicated or weird language in it.
Well, he wrote in different dialects depending on what his audience was. Like a lot of his political ones are actually more English because his audience was wider. Whereas some of the local ones, like talking about Scotch drink, and the early ones as well, particularly, he didn't think many people, like when he wrote that in Kilmarnock, he had no idea the popularity of it. So he's writing locally. It also wasn't very fashionable to write in that dialect when he was that age. So he was sort of pulling a little bit back. Does that make sense? Which is why I think he was beloved of, like, he was obviously very clever, but like the common man loved him because he wrote like they spoke, as opposed to, you know, everything came from Edinburgh. Because you got to remember, this is the Enlightenment. The Edinburgh Enlightenment's coming now as well. So it's, you know, there's that sort of shining light of intellect in Edinburgh, but he bridged two worlds really, really well.
He worked as a whiskey gauger as well, didn't he?
So the last stanza of that poem, he talks about the evil excise and about, you know, because everyone hated the excise because they're charging money for whiskey and they're finding the illegal of it. And then obviously the juxtaposition of that is the end of his life. He was always skint. Like, he spent what he earned, and you know, he had an eye for whiskey and the ladies and everything else as well. So he never had a lot of money in his pocket. And near the end of his life, when he was strapped for cash, they got him a job as an exciseman, which is like the ultimate irony. They went back to that just before he passed away. So yeah, he'd have been ashamed of that at 27 to know at 37 to be catching the whiskey makers.
Cool. Right. So just back to Glentauchers. Have you got much experience with this? Have you tasted
Glentauchers? No, I've never. I think I've had an independent bottling once from Gordon MacPhail, and that's it. And I didn't even have the whole bottle at a taste. I passed it. It's obviously between Craigallachie and Keith, and you see it there, but there's no way you're going to visit it. Well, at least I was never aware of, and it's always one that Tristan and I have visited quite a few distilleries together. We always make the rule, if you see the still, you visit the distillery, but it's one I've never managed to do. And like when it came through, because I've not opened it till now as well, and I didn't realize what a sherry bomb was going to be, which is a delight. Because you just don't know what's going to be, because it's so much a blending malt, isn't it? It's having its own is quite rare.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's a few of the distilleries we've featured, and especially the ones that we've done in the Flora and Fauna range, Diageo's Flora and Fauna range. It's one of these, you know, pretty large distilleries. They do something like 5 million gallons of pure alcohol a year.
Yeah.
So it's not a small operation. It's sort of middle to large, I would say, in size. Like a lot of those other ones we've done, you know, it's unusual to see bottlings, and there isn't an official bottling. However, it's owned by Chivas Brothers now, which is part of Pernod Ricard, and there is now a bottling you can get which comes under the Ballantine's range, and it's sort of, Ballantine's is a blended whiskey, and Glentauchers is one of the main contributors to that blend. So what they've done, because they've got other distilleries as well, they've sort of started, a bit like the Flora and Fauna range, started releasing sort of single malts under that blending brand. So you can now get a 15-year-old from this distillery, and that's as close as you're going to get to a distillery bottling. But other than that, as you say, Gordon MacPhail for a long time have sort of done an unofficial distillery bottling, which I think is also a 15-year-old. I mean, Gordon MacPhail, sort of one of the things they're famous for really is shining a light on distilleries that don't have their own, you know, bottling. I mean, Mortlach for a long time was sort of, it was almost the de facto bottling of that. Was Gordon MacPhail, and there's a few others as well. But the history of it's not especially interesting, to be honest with you. It was founded by James Buchanan, again another big one of the sort of barons of blending. Oh yeah.
I don't know if you froze or I froze there.
I think everything froze. We're breaking the internet. There
we go.
So yeah, James Buchanan, sort of one of the big barons of blending, big name in blending. He was, in a strange way, sort of your prototypical sort of Scottish aristocracy, big tall hat, bright ginger hair, but he was actually Canadian. Nevertheless, you know, one of the sort of great ambassadors of Scotch whiskey, alongside the likes of Tommy Dewar and Alexander Walker, all the big names of blending. Anyway, he founded a distillery in order to support his blending operation. So he was making Buchanan's, and he was also making the official blend of the House of Commons. And so that whiskey later went on to become Black and White, which you can still get today. It was a bit like Johnny Walker Black Label, which was sort of originally called Johnny Walker Old Highland Blend, but because it had a black label, everyone called it Black Label, and then the name changed. Similarly, the House of Commons blend was Black and White bottle, and everyone just started calling it Black and White. Glentauchers was built, in order to support that operation. But then the whole story of it in the 20th century is really long, convoluted, and pretty boring. It was mergers, acquisitions, changed hands,
passing of hand to hand, and big deals, and
it's been through all your big brands today, Chivas, Dewar's, Diageo, they've all owned it at one point or other. So it's kind of a bit boring, but it was mothballed eventually. Actually, one interesting thing about it was right back in the early 20th century, they trialed continuous distillation of malt there. Yeah, there's only two malt distilleries that have ever done that, and the other one is Loch Lomond, which still do it. So it was sort of, I guess, a little bit of a guinea pig science experiment for that sort of short period. But that's about it. Mothballed in the 80s, and then eventually reopened, expanded, and such. And here we have it today. So it's not got a kind of a romantic history to it really. It's been a workhorse, and there are many of these workhorses. But I think that this whiskey sort of goes to show that just because you're a workhorse, it doesn't mean you can't make tasty drams.
Well, all malts were workhorses. None of them would survive if they weren't. Does that make sense? And this is always a bit when people say they don't drink blends. Is that A, you're an idiot, and B, like without blends, there's no malts. Do you know what I mean? They're components. That's what their job has been for decades. And but so many. I mean, even in the short time I've been drinking whiskey, there's so many more malts available. By the bottle. It's amazing how it's changed. Are they always sherry when they offered you casks? Is sherry a big thing for them, or
no? It's not. No, it's not a big thing for them. I think they've got a pretty classic split. It's probably 90% bourbon cask and then a mixture of other stuff. So it's not famous for being a sherried whiskey or anything like that. So again, it's in a sense this is like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you're getting to try something that's 100% sherry, and that in itself is interesting because those sort of whiskies aren't commonplace. But on the other hand, sherry has this effect, especially when it's 100% of the life of the whiskies in sherry cask, of masking a lot of the distillery character. So it is hard to pick out what's going on underneath. But what I will say is that Glentauchers is famous for being quite fragrant. It's on the fragrant end of the flavor spectrum, fragrant and oily.
I'd say it's youths on its side as well. Like 6 years old is quite unusual to get hold of a sherry there as well. And I don't feel it's swamped it. It's definitely a sherry dram, but it's not swamped, is it?
Totally. And I think if you went up to 12 years or 15 years, then it may become swamped. You always want to get in there earlier with these sherry cask ones, don't you?
I always think it's that there is a bit of toffee at the end, but it's right at the end. When you get the toffee up front, the sherry's just dominated it, and you might find some peat, but you're not going to find anything else in it. Whereas you only get the toffee at the end of this, right in the back, which I think is a perfect example of it's the right time to get it in.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing to consider as well, because sherry casks are much bigger than bourbon casks. They're like twice the size, or even 2.5 times the size.
But
so when you think about maturation as a sort of physical process, you've got to think about the surface area to volume ratio of the barrel, right? And so bourbon casks are like 200 odd liters, sherry cask 400 liters. So you've got half as much surface area to each liter of liquid for this particular maturation as you do to a whiskey that's aged in a bourbon cask. So in some sense, and some sort of processes in the maturation evolution are going to take place half as fast. So it is quite amazing to have a 6-year-old, 100% sherry cask whiskey that has so much maturation character to it.
I do wonder, like, I totally agree with you, and obviously the science is there for the wood. However, as you sort of say, first fill sherry, we're getting some liquid here as well. And I wonder, does that balance out a little bit? Like, is there, are we sort of jump starting because I don't know how deep the sherry goes. I don't know how much that goes into the wood, or is there some really lovely flavors to be had right at the surface before it starts going further and further? I don't know, but yeah.
It's nuts though, isn't it? I mean, you know, you think you got this big barrel and it's got a load of sherry in it, but you've put 400 liters of new make spirit into it. I mean, if you think about taking 400 liters, like you couldn't even wrap your arms around this thing.
Yeah.
Of not neutral, but you know, very lightly flavored spirit. How many bottles of sherry would you need to pour into that for it to start tasting like sherry, right?
And it's at what, 63% minimum? You know, it's quite a lot of potent stuff. If you put some Ray and Nephew with a pin drop of sherry in something, how long is that going to take to have an effect? Exactly. Yeah.
This is it. Yeah. So it's weird. It's interesting to think about these things. And I mean, my experience of traveling around Scotland and asking questions about this sort of stuff is it's really difficult to get solid answers. Like for the most part, most people managing warehouses and distilleries and programs are just like, well, you know, we put it in barrels and see what happens, and then we take it out and we mix it.
I think that's the honest answer, though, isn't it? It's that is. I remember Mickey Heads, the first time I went to Arbikie and Mickey was there, and he let us try one from the barrel, and he talked about how he'd been panicked about this one for years because it didn't do anything. He says, Craig, this one didn't do anything for years. He says, that barrel was bought from the same source. They're filled the same day. I filled them. They've sat there, but this one didn't do anything. He says, in the last couple of years, though, it's really come along and it's, you know, nearly there. But he says, I was really panicked. I just thought it was a duff cask. And it's, you know, there's that intricate chemistry that's going to have the final effect on flavor. It's not predictable, is it? Thank God, which is why, you know, we get what we get.
This is it. And that's why it will hopefully continue even for hundreds of years from now, because we'll always find wonder in the unpredictability of what's going to come out the other end from these natural ingredients.
I've often thought if aliens ever visited us and they go, like, so you wait 30 years for this thing to get to the flavor you want when you kind of know what the flavors are, what are you up to? Like, it doesn't seem to make sense, but that intricacy of flavor, you just can't replicate it. I mean, we have cheated, haven't we? We've added liquids into things to try and replicate flavors that are there, but you never get that subtle interplay of something that's, you know, amazing.
Well, I mean, look, there's and the rum industry is particularly guilty of this. There's a lot of rums out there now that are trying to simulate the effect of long maturation by flavoring their spirits. And, you know, you can have the wool pulled over your eyes, but when in a blind tasting, when you start doing proper comparisons, you're like, okay, that one's got something shifty going on. I can smell a rat, you know?
Yeah,
because it's really difficult to properly like emulate that effect of long time in wood and the oxidation and all that sort of stuff that takes place.
And it's the things that are indetectable on their own, but add 4 or 5 together and suddenly you get something that's different, and that's going to pull it through.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We'll do a couple of quick comments and questions, and then I'm going to have a crack at reading something. What do we got here? I just saw a couple of good ones here. Oh yeah, I want to know what is in Craig's other drink is. Have you got another drink there, Craig?
I have. I've got a delicious beer going on. It's not a West because I stole this glass from a pub in Glasgow years ago, but it's big enough to keep in the freezer when it goes off that. But yeah, I'm afraid it's just a lovely local ale that I've got in there. So yeah, sorry about that.
Yes, we did cut it down to 54%. I believe when it came out of casks, it was somewhere in the region of 61 and a half, something like that. And we decided to cut it partly because if we didn't, we wouldn't have any bottles to sell, and so it made it go further. And partly because it seemed like the right sort of compromise between, you know, kind of pure cask strength and something that wasn't, you know, too weak.
Well, it's that balance, isn't it? Like if it's over 60, I know I have to add water really, but in the 50s, I'll try it and find out. And depending where I am in my evening, earlier on I might add water, later on I might not need it. So yeah, I mean, I've not been inclined to add water to that at all, to be honest.
No, neither have I yet, actually. But it might come to it. Right, let's have a go at this then. A little bit nervous, actually.
Well, just to put you up there, before you destroy Burns, now things to note, Bob Dylan said he's the best lyricist ever to exist. Steinbeck and Salinger quote him as an inspiration. Douglas Adams. So, you know, this is the Shakespeare, essentially, of Scotland and perhaps the world. So let's hear you slaughter that now, Tristan.
Thanks. So I'm doing the Ballad of John Balicorn. which actually struck me as quite fitting because it's a poem about the humble barley grain or sheaf of barley. And of course, we had Christian on from Arbikie, and they are farming barley, and you know, the cereals themselves are very much at the roots, if you excuse the pun, of that whole distillery. So it seemed quite fitting. Ballad John Balicorn, Robert Burns. There was 3 kings into the east, 3 kings both great and high, and they hae sworn a solemn oath, John Barleycorn should die. They took a plough and ploughed him down, put clods upon his head, and they hae sworn a solemn oath, John Barleycorn was dead. But the cheerful spring came kindly on, and showers began to fall. John Barleycorn got up again, and so surprised them all. The sultry suns of summer came, and he grew thick and strong, his head weel armed with pointed spears, that no one should him wrong. The sober autumn entered mild, when he grew wan and pale. His bending joints and drooping head showed he began to fail. His colour sickened more and more, he faded into age, and then his enemies began to show their deadly rage. They've ta'en a weapon long and sharp, and cut him by the knee, then tied him fast upon a cart, like a rogue for forgery. They laid him down upon his back, and cudgelled him full sore. They hung him up before the storm, and turned him o'er and o'er. They filled up a darksome pit, with water to the brim. Then they heaved in John Barleycorn, they let him sink or swim. They laid him out upon the floor, to work him farther woe, and still as signs of life appeared, they tossed him to and fro. They wasted o'er a scorching flame the marrow of his bones, but a miller used him worst of all, for he crushed him between 2 stones. And they hae ta'en his very heart's blood, and drank it round and round, and still the more and more they drank, their joy did more abound. John Barleycorn was a hero bold, of noble enterprise. For if ye do but taste his blood, 'twill make your courage rise. 'Twill make a man forget his woe, 'twill heighten all his joy, 'twill make a widow's heart to sing, though the tear were in her eye. Then let us toast John Barleycorn, each man in glass a hand, and may his great posterity ne'er fail in old Scotland.
Cheers, well done.
Cheers.
Glad you that.
I'm sure everyone's applauding somewhere.
Well, I mean, you started a bit Irish, which you can't help. That's your genetics, but you finished Scottish. You finished well.
Thanks, mate. That means a lot.
That's a good dram, isn't it?
It is tasty, right?
Yeah, it really is.
We're really happy with it. And it's, I think also, like, we're going to bottle one of our own, then we want it to be something that's quite extreme and abstract and sort of on the sort of fringes of whiskey flavor, because, you know, there's plenty of stuff in the middle bit there that we can get hold of and send out.
It's a more perfumed version, I think, of the old Flora Fauna Mortlach. You know, the sherry's there and big, but the spirit is still involved. And whereas with the Mortlach, it used to be like a meaty version. This is there's a lovely sort of light perfume to the front of it, isn't it? Which I think is lovely, like a fragrance.
Do you know what? Particularly when you add water, though, the perfume really starts to come out of it. I think I just put some in there then. And I think actually the water, you know, I mentioned before that perfumed oily spirit, a bit like Liquid, which we did a month or 2 ago, had that perfume oiliness, and that starts to come through. You lose some of the sherry when you get water, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Which isn't always a good thing in my heart, but you know, if you're not as good a share as me, but yeah.
But this is the good thing about having it at 54, right? You've got options then,
exactly,
which is good. Right, let's do a couple more questions and some tasting notes, and then we'll hand it back over to you, Craig, for another recital of something or other. How many bottles did you actually end up with? I think it's 180 or thereabouts.
I'm already starting to panic. They're going to be gone before the end of this. You said 3/4 of them are gone. Tom, if you're watching this, can you buy one for me now and then hold them?
We're sending you one anyway as payment for these services.
Oh, I was getting paid. That's delightful. I just thought it was here to bring the tone down. That's amazing. That's perfect.
Don't worry, you've got one coming. Right, here's another question. Should you add water and ice or not, or personal preference? It's totally personal preference. There is no right or wrong. But try it all. And yeah, I think it's different for each whiskey as well. And of course, different for the circumstances you're in, the occasion, the people you're with.
I really think it's time of day, who you're with, when you're having it, what you had before. Like, go careful. Like, start neat. Never add ice and water at the start. Try it neat, then decide. That's the way I've always done it. And
yeah. I know someone asked for what sherry it was. It's Oloroso. Sorry, I should have mentioned that, but they were all Oloroso casks.
Unusual as well to get 3 the same. That's amazing.
Yeah, 3 the same. Here's something important I think we should probably talk about. Didn't realize Burns had Irish heritage. I am half Irish.
He is Irish. You can tell you were Irish when you started that. You finished Scots, but you started Irish. It was brilliant.
Cool. Right, what have you got next for us, Craig?
I'm going to do probably the arse end of a red rose. So there's a couple. So like the man was 37 when he died. That's his works. He was a great collector of songs. He was a big advocate. Like Old Lang Syne, they're not sure if it's all his because he collected a lot of songs and he never took credit for them. So he put them in, but quite often he tweaked them and modernized them for his time and stuff as well. So although he doesn't claim Old Lang Syne, we credit it to Burns, but he definitely collated it. And there's many songs from all over the country that he pulled together and did that as well. There are, for those of you of the childish disposition, the Merry Muses of Caledonia. So basically, he took all the dirty poems and songs that boys sing in the pub. If you're ever in the pub and me and Tristan, there's a fair chance we're going to sing at you at some point. But they took all the sort of rugby songs of their day. He's also got them. My favourite of which is 9 Inches Will Please a Lady, which I'm never going to stand a chance of. But I'm not going to do that tonight because it's Tristan's podcast. But A Red Rose is... It seems like a chocolate box song because you only know those first couple of stanzas. But Bob Dylan, not a bad writer, says it's the most perfect bit of prose that was ever written, and is an inspiration for him as well. So yeah, so I'm going to go through it, the first 4. But like, you're going to start off Milk Tray Chocolate advert, but at the end of it, you go, that boy could write. Oh, my love's like a red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love's like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. As fair thou art, my bonny lass, so deep in love am I, and I will love thee still, my dear, till all the seas gang dry. Till all the seas gang dry, my dear, and the rocks melt with the sun. I will love thee still, my dear, while the sands of life shall run. And fare thee well, my bonny lass, and fare thee well, my love, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 mile. So I just think that, the rocks melt with the sun. It's a Dali painting in your head that he's already written. It's amazing. Yeah. So yeah, give him a chance. Like it's like whiskey. The first thing you thought.
The thing I like about that one is you can memorize that and then just pull it out of your arsenal when needed.
I actually did, and I read a bit of it wrong because I had it in my head. I can nearly do that one already, and I actually messed up a line, but I thought no one else is following it line by line. I'll just go with what I know. They're not going to know that.
I've heard it before, and I think it might have been from you, probably on about 10 different occasions when we've been pissed.
But it's like, Bob Dylan, a man that can write, that he calls that the perfect prose. And it's like Stein of Mice and Men comes from that as well. Douglas Adams, the mice that control the universe, that all comes from To a Mouse. He was a big socialist. Again, ironic because he ended up as an exciseman, but he was quite revolutionary at the end. He did quite a lot of poems anonymously as well, especially his political writings in English. He didn't put his name to them because he had that sort of colourful, the guy that says cool things up north, and he did quite a lot of his stuff anonymously as well. So he's worth looking into it. And why is it not a Shakespeare Day? Do you know what I mean? I just don't understand when you've got someone so amazing. No, I don't even know when his birthday is, but like it makes sense to have, if you're going to celebrate someone, why not Shakespeare? And he is, even more influential, you would argue, wouldn't you? So there should be a day where we celebrate him as well and drink beer. Surely. It's
strange there isn't one. I mean, he's definitely one of the biggest names in the history of these islands.
But even abroad, there's no story that hasn't got Shakespeare in it. But he's been influenced everything, isn't he? So yeah.
Yeah. Do you think this might sound offensive to some people? But do you think like Burns was sort of like the edgy hip hop artist of his day?
Well,
like,
he was also the Banksy, so he was given a diamond tip pen. and he used to write prose in windows in pubs, sometimes quite scathing. There's a famous one where he went to see a laird and he couldn't see him because he had the fisheries commission or something in, and the landlord was a bit of a shit to him, and he basically ripped him in his window in a diamond tip pen that was given, which you can't get rid of, and closed glass is so expensive. You know, you weren't going to get out. So, you know, he was like, you know, his social commentary, like doing graffiti and fathering children. That seemed to be his main occupations and spending money. Like he was skin. He was always skin.
It's like tagging plate glass windows with his diamond tip pen. Yeah, I mean, it's quite gangster, isn't it?
It really is. Although it's given to him by a laird, which takes away the gangsterish, because who has a diamond? Yeah, exactly. So, you know, having the diamond is a bit, you know, a bit bling. But again, that's quite rapper. So, you know, that's maybe where it comes from.
Apparently, Shakespeare's Day is on St. George's Day, but I mean, somewhat overshadowed by St. George's Day.
But we talk about St. George, there's nothing wrong with St. George, but he was Turkish. Like Shakespeare was born here and should be celebrated, shouldn't he? Like it's sort of, you know, you think, you know, there's a man worth celebrating.
Oh, this is good. Just so I'm not the only one getting the flack. Have a little read of that.
A bit Welsh. No, it's Cornwall. I was going to swear there, but I won't because it says.
Oh, dear. Right, let's answer some whiskey questions. If anyone's got whiskey questions, now's a good time to throw them up. Here's one. Is there a good novice sherry recommendation for a sherry cask whiskey fan?
I don't know. Like just falling up with sherry, for me, it's the Distiller's Edition Lagavulin, which is a PX. I have a sweet tooth, but it's like the spirit reigns supreme, but the PX finishes it. So it's, you know, it takes a lot to overwhelm a Lagavulin. For me, that was phenomenal. Drier sherries, I'll pass you over to my less sweet tooth friend who may be able to give you something there. But for me, that PX finish Lagavulin is still one of the best balances of sherry and spirit that I've had.
Yeah, I think for me, you need to have, for sherry to work really well, you need to have a spirit that's already got a substantial character of its own. I mean, Lagavulin, needless to say, has that. And so you can just chuck whatever you want at it in terms of sherry, and it's always going to shine through because it's so smoky. But if you want to go away from smoky, I mean, one of my favorite whiskies of all time is Clynelish Distiller's Edition. And that is aged in, I think it's Oloroso casks, for about a year or 2 years. It's not a lot, but when you combine the flavor of the sherry along with that sort of honey, waxy, sort of oak characteristics of Clynelish, you know, as it is without the sherry, then it's just a wonderful marriage. And I think another couple of other recommendations. One would be Glentauchers, which is a distillery we've featured on here before a couple of times actually. They
come all out there, Glentauchers. Like you'll pay less. Like other companies would charge you twice as much for it. And like the 105 is an amazing dram always, and their aged liquids are reasonably priced and always phenomenal. I've never had a bad Glentauchers my whole life, and I've had most of them, I think. Yeah,
family owned, and when we say family owned, we mean like it's just a family that own that distillery kind of thing, rather than family owned, but we own like billions of dollars.
Belgium.
And like you say, they're so reasonably priced. It's almost a bit of a steal, really, compared to the prices that some other brands are charging. And nearly as near as damn everything they mature in is sherry cask. We've been to the distillery together. I've been a few times, and I'm always sort of like trying to find out if they've got other barrels there. And besides some like dodgy old chestnut casks from like the 1940s.
Did you try liquid?
No.
Oh.
They wouldn't even confirm or deny it is sherry chestnut casks. But there's so
surely that's leaky.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. The regulation that it needed to be oak only came in sort of middle of the 20th century, I think. Before that, it was a bit more vague.
Yeah.
And so there were sort of casks of other woods hanging around. And my understanding with it is that chestnut and oak weren't dissimilar in terms of the way they behave as a barrel. And so, and also difficult to identify or to tell apart. So it's been suggested to me by a couple of people who know more than I do that there are chestnut casks lurking around in a few distilleries.
Well, that would make sense. When you get some of the older casks, you know, that have gone a long time. They were used 2 or 3 times before, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely recommend Glentauchers if you want to try sherry cask for sure. Any other?
Is everyone just taking the mick out of our accents? Is that essentially what was the question?
I think it's just turned into character assassination at this point. Oh, here we go. Craig, you like a sherry bomb? Do you have any recommendations? Well,
yeah, we kind of went there. So Farkless is an amazing sherry bomb. I'll tell you what I have. Again, like a full we go through. Can't go through here without one of Tristan's favourites, which I believe is a lot of sherry, which is the old Bruichladdich, the Blackhearts. Like that's such a great dram. And they don't specify so much what's in it, and it does vary like every year. But I'm lucky enough to have a friend Abby that works for them, and like whenever I'm walking through a show, she'll put one in my hand, and I've never not been amazed. You know, as it comes through, it's not a cheap dram. I totally appreciate that as well. It's certainly not a beginner's, but there's an interplay of sherry, but it's not just sherry. There's so much going on. There's a very layered, rich tapestry of stuff going through. Who else has done good sherry lately, Tristan? I'm trying to think.
That one, the Black Arts, is expensive. I mean, it's what, £250 a bottle now, or something, or even more maybe. And yeah, so the whole idea of that bottle is it's the black art of blending. So this idea that it's more sort of magic than it is science, more art, black art indeed. And so there's a lot of red wine cask in that too. There's a lot of everything. And actually, the origin of that product was that when they took over the distillery, who was it had before? Was it? I can't remember who had it before when they took it over. I
can't either, to be honest. Did they not start it? They pulled out of obscurity. It was mothball, wasn't it, when they started it?
Yeah, but there was, so basically when they took it over back in the early noughties, the warehouse was just full of pretty bad whiskey. They hadn't been buying very well, and the casks were in poor shape, and there wasn't a lot to work with. So they put out a lot of pretty poor quality whiskies. But what they also did was they started to look at what had potential. And this was Jim McEwen, who's one of the greatest whiskey blenders who's ever lived. And Black Art was sort of this culmination of trying to combine together not great stuff into something that was incredible. And so there's the Black Art in it, right? It's, you can take these below par ingredients and make something unbelievable. And it's like we've had a moment together with it a few times, and it's just, for me, one of the greatest whiskies I've ever had, especially in the earlier iterations. It dropped off a little bit in the last few years, and I think the more recent ones have been pretty good again.
Yeah, I got, I don't know if it's the very latest, but the one before that at the whiskey show in London, and Abby, God bless her, like literally she was 3 deep and she saw me going past, and I'd just been making drinks, I'd just been carrying drinks for someone else. And as I went past, the hand came out, and it was, easily dram of the show. It was phenomenal.
Yeah. Right, we're going to start wrapping this up. Do you have an Instagram handle to follow? Basically, it's people love you.
Loudmouth Soup 13, because that's what booze is. It's loudmouth soup, makes you loud. That's it. So yeah, but that's mostly about my family. I do have a work one, but I'm it's mostly about mixers. You don't want to follow that, it's fine.
Here's another one definitely relevant for you. Speaking of blending, does anyone have any experience in making an infinity bottle?
So I've had one on the go. My eldest son is 15. It's at least that old, although a decanter got broken. So I started it. I read Sainsbury's book, which I'm sure we all did, and they talked about how they bought casks at different levels, and you add the good to the bad. But for me, if you've not books you should read, Pip Hill's Founder's Tale. So that's amazing. So Pip Hill's his Appreciating Scotch Whisky, which you can get for £5, was probably one of the most influential books I got when I started learning about whiskey. And he talks about whiskey going off in a bar, and it does go off. I've had corked whiskey twice. One of them was a Bowmore 30, actually. So I've had corked whiskey before. So at home, I only ever have 3 bottles of whiskey open, but I have the Harper House blend, which is always there as well. So if you open a bottle of whiskey, and if you're on here, you're a geek, I'm fairly sure. So you open a bottle of whiskey, it's okay, but you have another one you want to get past to get to. So what you have to do is you have to get through half of that. Then you can throw all that in the Harper House blend, maybe over a couple of bottles to keep it up there. And it's just, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not so great, but it's just, if you ever meet me in a bar and I've got a hip flask on me, chances are it's the Harper House blend. So it's I will occasionally add a little bit of sherry to it if I'm not particularly happy with it. But yeah, I've got every whiskey I've ever opened in my house in the last 15, 16 years. I've got at least a little bit. And if it wasn't very good, probably quite a lot of it. But yeah, I recommend it immediately. And don't open too many whiskies at home. Drink them and get on to the next one. That's the most important bit. That is the joy of these, apart from aeroplanes, which I've saved mine up because I have to start flying soon. So that's the best thing about them, because when you get to an airport, you go, no, it's 50 mil. I'm fine.
Yeah. Well, of course, you can always drink them and then refill them, right? That's the good thing about them.
Exactly.
They're a bit lighter than hip flasks and all that sort of thing.
And if you lose it, you're not in trouble for the person that gave it to you.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Right. Well, look, this has been fun. We've done our longest ever tasting, I think.
We had two tastings, though, so that's fair. So yeah,
2 tastings. So it's been really fun. And we've managed to keep 73 people still watching, which is impressive, I think.
Carlos is a super fan. He should definitely get something. He's been amazing. He's had good comments all the way through, I've seen as well. So Carlos,
Carlos, the super fan. Carlos. Yeah. Carlos's keyboard's on fire. He has been melting keys there.
But he's had his comments on the Arbikie and stuff were bang on as well.
Exactly. Yeah, brilliant. Right. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Craig, for your time. We will definitely have you back again. I'll twist your arm on that one.
And I'll see you on Friday. You gonna tell everyone what you're doing on Friday?
I'm running 100 miles on Friday, and Craig is my support crew.
I wait for him with a flask, maybe a dram, as he goes friends. There we go.
All right. See you later, everyone. Thanks.
Take care. Thanks very much.